Good evening and welcome to you all. I'm Mark Bartlett, the head librarian of the Society Library, and it's great to see a full room and an audience for this evening's presentation. Tonight we have a number of library members here and trustees in attendance, and I wanted to thank all of our members and trustees for their support of the library. Our annual appeal last year did very well, and it is because of the support of our members that we're able to have a great library with active programming, a children's library, wonderful reading rooms like our members' room, and the many things that happen in this building. I do know that we also have a number of guests in the audience from various constituencies on the Eastern Seaboard. Some people are here from as far away as Rutgers University, I believe. And we welcome some library school students as well from Pratt and a couple of other schools. We're kicking off our National Library Week celebration with this event, with the somewhat provocative title of "The Book is Dead, Long Live the Book." I knew that when we gave it that name that it would definitely draw a few people. I do want to mention one thing about our other events this week during National Library Week. We do have Jules and Kate Pfeiffer on Thursday afternoon, and on Saturday we're having a reception and a talk by Brian J. Jones on Washington Irving, who is a former library member, and he was a trustee here, and of course a very important American writer. The Society Library, for those of you who don't know, is the oldest library in the city. It goes back to 1754, back when the word society had no real connotations of class. And the library's purpose was to improve the lives of New Yorkers by building a collection of books and making them available. We are still thriving 254 years later, and we are one of the last standing of the membership or subscription libraries in the United States. And we are one of 3 membership libraries here in New York City. I would like to thank, to start, Maggie Jackson, who will be our host and moderator for this evening. And Maggie is an award-winning writer and Boston Globe columnist, and she has a book that's coming out very shortly called Distracted: The Erosion of Attention and the Coming Dark Age. And she's also the author of another very interesting book I would recommend reading, What's Happening to Home: Balancing Work, Life, and Refuge in the Information Age. One final note before I hand the podium over to Maggie is that tonight we are testing our new sound system, everything from microphones to speakers to video recording and audio recording. So please bear with us if there are any mishaps or a little bit of feedback here or there, but I think everything should go smoothly. So without further ado, Maggie Jackson.
Well, thank you. I want to thank, first of all, Sarah, Elliot Holliday, Caroline Waters, and Mark Bartlett for all the time they put in putting together not only this event, but the program for National Library Week. So, have we come to bury this? Is the book going the way of the chainmail or butter churns? 174,000 books were published in the United States in a recent year, and yet 57% of Americans say they do not read a single book a year, fiction or nonfiction. Is MIT professor William Mitchell correct in saying that soon books will be cherished only by, quote, those addicted to tree flakes encased in dead cow? In the fluid, hyper-connected, global digital age, books, some say, are solitary, isolating, unchanging. And of course, all this echoes Plato's lament about the written word. He said, writing can't answer back. It, quote, preserves a solemn silence. Or is it really the printed book that's dying? Will the Kindle, the Amazon new e-reader, spark a metaphorical fire that will reduce print to ashes for once and for all? 1 million books are being digitized a year. Now, so has the text flown free? Are we authors and publishers all? The next step, the universal library. A hyperlinked, easy access soup of the written word. Kevin Kelly, the editor of Wired, says, it will be a very large single text, the world's only book. Well, were it that simple, then we could celebrate or mourn. Case closed. But really, pitting the technorati versus the literati diminishes our discussion of the book today. Tonight, we should be open-minded, perhaps dismantle some of the sacred assumptions we have about book versus screen. The book, for instance, is more mutable than we perhaps realize. Recall its iterations from the volume end to the penny chapbook, and remember its interactivity. Alberto Manguel says that we forget every text is in a very essential sense interactive, changing according to a particular reader or hour or place. Books have brought us to the doorstep of the digital age. And just as the digital has no monopoly on flexibility, so the book has no monopoly on authenticity. It wasn't until 1760 that Adrian Johns says the first printed book was printed without error. And an in-depth dive into the web today reveals troves of vetted, peer-reviewed, written in knowledge. So remember, the book and the screen are both vessels of the text, carriers in Michael Gorman's words. They're vessels of our hopes and dreams, of our curiosity, and they're both communication technologies, which history tells us have a way of overlapping in surprising and messy and dynamic ways. The cinema did not kill painting. The TV did not kill radio. And the New York Society Library had telephone service in 1900, which is brave because telephones were a broadcast medium in that day and age. So today, I see much evidence of synergy between these two carriers of the text. Bloggers. What is the mark of success of a blogger? A book contract. And where do critics of cyberspace vent their opinions? On the web. So before introducing our two esteemed panelists who will work their way into the intricacies of these thorny questions, I'd just like to throw out three questions for the evening. Plant the seeds of these three questions. First, what role will the print and the digital word play in our lives? How can we harness their strengths? The digital gives us breadth, it emphasizes relationships and fluidity, and yet it can degenerate into fragmentation, even chaos. As Jim Neal has said, will we have information utopia or anarchy? Print gives us depth. It, as John Updike calls, edges, established frameworks for sifting knowledge. And yet many bridle at what they say is the print age's unbending hierarchies of control. Two, what context do the book and the screen operate in? What is the milieu in which they will unfold? We live in a world of split focus. Information workers switch tasks every 3 minutes all day long, and it takes 25 minutes to circle back to your original work once you're interrupted. We live in a culture of lost threads, of alternative universes, of virtuality and speed. How will we read? I was one day sitting on the steps of the big 42nd Street main branch, having a cup of tea and a break and admiring the lions, and I saw a family of tourists marching up the steps, and dragging behind was a whining teenager who said, we don't come to the library at home. Why are we coming here? Well, why do we come here? Is the library going to be simply a permeable, portable information docking station, or something more? And can the library lead us into the way of safeguarding the fragile digital historical record? And last, how do we wish to use these tools? What values do we bring to the question? In other words, what is literacy? I would argue at the moment we're not reading well at either format in our nation. 30% of college graduates are proficient at reading a document, such as a newspaper. That's down from 40% in 1992. And in a recent test of college graduates nationwide, only 50% could judge the objectivity of a website. So young or old, tech savvy or not, I don't think we're really navigating and evaluating what's in cyberspace. So luckily, we have two renowned authorities here to wade into these questions. Michael Gorman is past president of the American Library Association, and last year he retired as Dean of Library Services at California State University, Fresno, after many decades as a librarian. An authority on matters related to libraries and the book on both sides of the Atlantic, He's known for his passionate defense of the crucial role of books and reading in our lives. And James Neal is Vice President for Information Services and University Librarian at Columbia, responsible for academic computing and for the university's 25 libraries, a system that is among the top 5 in academic research in North America. He's active in areas related to copyright, scholarly publishing, digital libraries, information standards, and intellectual freedom. Columbia is actively digitizing its collections and participating in the Microsoft and Google book projects. So we welcome them both, and Mr. Gorman will speak first.
Thank you very much. I would be even more in awe of the speaking in a 254-year-old library had I not had the great honor of speaking 3 or 4 years ago at the 450th anniversary of the Bodleian Library in the Sheldonian, which is even more sumptuous a place in which to speak than this room. I think that our discussions of the book and the future of the book and the future of human communication are bedeviled by 2 things. One is misunderstanding, and the other is the kind of cartoonish approach to discussion that characterizes a lot of public life in the West today. For example, we fail very often to distinguish between information and knowledge. And I think it is arguable that libraries and the life of the mind are much more dependent on the transmittal and preservation of recorded knowledge than they are on questions of information. We're told we live in an information age, we're told that information is power, and so on. And it all turns out that, of course, that computers are very good at information and not very good at recorded knowledge. And I think that that is where the crux of the question about the place of the book as part of the human record resides. Another thing that we ignore, I think, is the idea that we are responsible as librarians, as researchers, as citizens, as a society for not only access to the human record, but the preservation and onward transmittal of that human record. And I think if you look at the history of human communication from 8, 9 millennia ago, when people started recording their thoughts, that you will see that that was the time, in Thomas Carlyle's words, where the age of miracles began. Because human beings only learn in 3 ways. They learn from experience. And we've been doing that ever since there were human beings. You notice somebody eating a handful of red berries and dropping dead, and you tend to abstain from red berries from that point. We learn from interaction with people who know more than we do. Teachers, rabbis, priests, shamans, whatever. And we've been doing that since the first wise woman gathered some cave dwellers around her and told those people what she knew. And the third way we learn is from recorded knowledge, from reading, from the records of the past that have come down to us. Because the knowledge you gain from experience dies with you. The knowledge from teachers dies with the teachers unless it's recorded. And we all know what the history of oral history is, that the testaments that people give get garbled over the years and the centuries and eventually attenuate and vanish. So the role of the librarian and the archivist, and I don't regard these as separate professions, I regard them as members of the same church but in schism. In fact, the archivists are the Protestants and the librarians are the Catholics with the rituals and their bibliographic Vatican, Washington, etc., etc. Anyway, the role of the librarian and the archivist is to ensure that future generations know what we know. And the argument is not about nostalgia and the pleasures of reading, the beauty of the book, the beauty of print. I'm as susceptible as anybody of my age and type to that kind of thing. The argument is about what is the best way to ensure that future generations know what we know. And if you look at that history of human communication, it's possible to think that the last 500 years have been an aberration, an island of fixity, authenticity, onward transmission, in which very few texts, very few textual parts of the human record have completely died. And if you contrast that with the era that preceded it, the Manuscript Age, when you're dealing with, for example, Roman and Greek authors, we know of their existence, we know they wrote things, but we have none of their texts. Or other classical authors of whom we have a very fragmentary memory, because their works were destroyed in the Manuscript Age. A library burning down is a very bad thing. A manuscript collection burning down is a cultural catastrophe. And I think that we need to think about the age we're embarking on, apparently, the digital age, and look at its resemblances to the Manuscript Age. Just then, as now, you couldn't really trust what you saw. You had no idea when you were looking at something what it was what it claimed to be. It could be something that somebody had copied out and added their own interpolations. Just as today, it is perfectly possible to put a sex scene in the Book of Mormon, if you've got it online, and transmit it. In other words, we had this period, and we have this period, of fixity, authenticity, stability, of text that you can trust, text with edges, as was quoted earlier. And is it to be replaced by an era when everything is in doubt, when things are not only falsified, de-authenticated, if there is such a word, but also vanish? Just think of websites. I mean, a website is like those peculiar structures you see in Paris where they paste posters for exhibitions and singers and so on them, and then they peel away and somebody pastes something over it, so you get this kind of collage of fragments of memory until it all goes away. How do you preserve a website? You take a snapshot of it every 5 seconds. In what form do you preserve it? And I'm not saying any of this to denigrate the great advances and the many good things that digitization has brought us. Principally, I would argue, in the field of information. But just to say that there are perils ahead, that there is danger that huge swaths of the human record will vanish, or will be so altered as to be not usable. And in that environment, it is very important that we cling to two things. One is the dedication of a profession to the preservation of the human record, that is, of librarians and archivists, ensuring that documents of value are preserved and transmitted to the future. The other thing is to emphasize the importance of literacy. And by literacy, I don't mean the common kind of idea that literacy is a sort of hurdle. You know, one side you're illiterate, you jump over it, the other side you're literate. What I'm talking about is lifelong engagement with text. The ability to interact fruitfully and productively with complex texts, with ever more complex texts. In other words, literacy is a lifelong process. And I'm very afraid that we are depriving our young people in particular of the opportunity to empower themselves, to become autonomous human beings in a world in which they can interact with complex texts by emphasizing the visual and the fleeting, and by pretending that looking something up on Google is doing research. You know, it's a staple of the more ignorant kind of talk show. Somebody will call in and say, I've done research into this topic. And Kennedy was killed by people from Mars because I saw it online. So the idea is that we should be educating people to be literate, to be able to interact with complex texts to a greater and greater degree throughout their lives, to get pleasure from it as well as learning from it, and that we should emphasize the importance of critical thinking, of seeking the authentic, of trusting in expertise. Because Andrew Keane has a book called The Cult of the Amateur, where he's talking about the whole Web 2.0 thing as being, you know, the triumph of the slacker, the amateur, the person who feels they have something to say but doesn't really have very much to say. And we're drowning in this stuff. And one last thing I'd like to say about the book, because I have 4 minutes to go. I have my watch here. I also have your watch, so I have a double. Is that it is very easy to dismiss attachment to books as a vehicle for reading as nostalgia. And I'm thinking of 3 different things. One is my wife and I were at a cathedral in Rome during Mass, and they had a ceremony, and because it was all in Italian, I wasn't quite clear what the ceremony was, but anyway, they brought out an immense gold-bound volume of the Bible. And children, I think, in possibly confirmation dresses, and they weren't First Communion dresses, whatever it was, came up and kissed this volume, which was held out for them by the Archbishop. And I thought at the time, what is it they're kissing? Are they kissing the text? Are they saying that there's something behind this? This is just a carrier, it just happens to be bound in gold, but it could be just as well a paper bag. Or are they saying there's something important about this object? And then I live in Chicago, which is in many ways, of course, well behind New York, but I read the New York Times every day in a vain attempt to appear urbane and sophisticated. And I read 2 or 3 weeks ago about the paintings commissioned by Korean emperors. Did any of you read that? Of their bookshelves and so on. And they had these very elaborate paintings of, you know, shelves like this with objects on it and books and so on. Because they didn't display the books. The books were all away in chests. But they felt that there was something very powerful and important about having these representations of the books that they owned, the intellectual power that the emperor commanded. And just this morning in the New York Times, there's a review of the last book of essays by the late William Styron. And he talks about being in a military-sponsored college program at Duke, which was then has now possessed one of the great college libraries of America. He began to read voraciously, regarding the books in the Duke library as the rocks and the boulders he could cling to against his onrushing sense of doom and mortality. I read everything I could lay my hands on, he said some 50 years later. Even today, I can recall the slightly blind and bloodshot perception I had of the vaulted Gothic reading room, the smell of glue and sweat and stale documents, winter coughs, whispers, the clock ticking toward midnight as I raised my eyes over the edge of crime and punishment. The library was my hangout, my private club, my sanctuary, the place of my salvation. Is there any current Duke student who is going to recall looking at a computer in the Duke University Library with that kind of emotion in 50 years from now? Thank you.
Now Jim Neal. And we'll save questions till after Mr. Neal speaks.
Good evening. I came to New York and to Columbia in the fall of 2001, and I agreed to give a series of presentations to Columbia alumni groups around the Mid-Atlantic region. That January, I found myself traveling down to Philadelphia to attend such a meeting. Driving in my car down the turnpike, got into Philadelphia. It was snowing, but I found the Holiday Inn where the meeting was going to be held, parked my car, walked into the hotel, found the room, set up with chairs, much like this one. My talk was to begin around 8 o'clock. By 8:15, there was only one other person there. I suggested I should go ahead with my presentation. He agreed. I was using slides that evening, and I asked if he would show the slides as I spoke. He agreed to do that. Gave a talk, very inspiring talk. Asked if there were any questions. He said no. I sat down on the front row briefly and thought about this terrible ride back to the city in the snow, and I said, well, I've got to get out of here. I got to go back to New York. He says, no, you don't. You're going to stay. I said, no. I've got meetings in the morning. I can't take the risk of being late. I've got to get back to New York. He says, no, you're going to stay. I said, you don't get it. I've got to get back to New York City. He said, no, you don't get it. I'm the second speaker tonight. So why that story? Well, first of all, I'm glad that you showed up. But also, I feel a certain anxiety tonight, similar to that evening, addressing our digital future on the same program with my good colleague, Michael Gorman, in the context of this extraordinary and venerable New York Society Library. My basic position that I'll take tonight, for purposes of provocation, is that our future is defined by digital and network technology. Our learning, our scholarship, our work, our entertainment, our culture, our relationships, our economy, our legal system, the world of books and libraries, all types of aspects of our world are influenced by our dependence on computers, on electronic information, and on the internet and the web as tools for moving that information around. As we consider the book, let's remember what Abby Hoffman once said: sacred cows make the tastiest hamburger. Charles Kuralt once said that thanks to the interstate highway system in the United States, I can travel from New York to San Francisco and see absolutely nothing. The content is important. It's an important part of the infrastructure. But if we listen to our users, particularly those users who I work with, the students and researchers in a Columbia context, they say, content is important. I want more and better content, but I want more and better access. I want convenience. I want to do things that I've never been able to do before. I want to manage my productivity. I want to control the information and the content and the technology. And I really want to try and experiment in ways that I've never been able to before. Much of our work in the digital environment, much of our thinking and execution of the digital book has been moving text online. That is not taking advantage of the full potential of the digital environment. Clearly, online information defies the limitation of space and time. More accessibility, more availability. But we also need to recognize other important advantages. The immediacy of the information that's delivered online. The enhanced searchability. The currency of that information. The ability to ask new questions, to propose new research investigations that we never were able to look at before. The dynamism and fluidity of the information online. The interdisciplinarity of working in the online environment. The collaborative potential of scholars and students and other users working together. The integration of various media, of bringing text and sound and tools and video into the common space. The linkability of information. Information not standing on its own, but understood in terms of its relationship to other information. The interactive nature of working online. The ability of the machine to take over a lot of the work to allow me to focus on the knowledge and the intellectual aspects of working online. The ability to manipulate information, not just in the negative sense that Michael spoke about, which I acknowledge is a serious issue, but the ability to move objects around and to look at information and various tools through various dimensions. And the extraordinary encyclopedic nature of working online. The book limits the amount of information that we can transfer and communicate. Online, we can digitize huge quantities of information and package it in new, inciting, and important ways. But we can't set aside the important advantages of the book. Its portability, the ability to take it around where I want to go. Its durability, to throw that computer on the ground and smash it, and the inability to pick it up and use it again and access the information on it. I can throw that book on the floor, and I wouldn't do it, my preservation librarian would freak out, but I probably can pick it back up and use it again. The mark-up ability, and we know that students at Columbia love to tell the people who come after them in reading a book what they thought was important. The readability, and of course the technologies are advancing in terms of our ability to read information online, but there's nothing like the clarity and ability of working with the text in a printed. The archivability, as Michael noted, we have extraordinary resources in many of our research libraries, the papyrus and the cuneiforms in the libraries of Columbia sitting in our special collections that have survived for thousands of years. But information created in the last hour online very often is gone, never available to be used again. The affordability, the investments that's necessary to create and use electronic information versus my ability to walk down to Borders and to Barnes & Noble, for example, or into this library on a subscription basis and take out a book and use it. The ownability of a book and the ability to give that information contained in that book to someone else. That loss of ability online. The aesthetic quality of the book, what we enjoy and what we value. And in the scholarly context, what I call the ability of a young scholar to walk into their dean's office and throw their book on the table, and I call it the thumpability factor. There's something about being able to share your book in the printed form that you can't do in the online environment. George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright, was opening a new play in London, and he wrote to Winston Churchill, and he said, "Winston, I really would like you to be at the opening night's performance of my play, and I enclosed 2 tickets. One is for you and one is for a friend, if you have one." Churchill quickly replied, he said, "Dear Mr. Shaw, unfortunately I have another commitment that evening, but I would be very appreciative if you sent me 2 tickets to the second night's performance, if there is one." I think the question that all of this debate around the future of the book often raises is the future of the library. Will there be one? We at Columbia continue to remain very focused on the whole array, aura and importance of knowledge acquisitions, synthesis, navigation, dissemination, interpretation, and archiving. We still care very much about getting, organizing, finding, delivering, educating, and preserving the scholarly and cultural record. But we also recognizing that we're taking on a lot of new roles. We're reaching beyond that legacy function and responsibility, being responsible for that centuries of recorded record that we make available in our libraries. We are an important part of the infrastructure of the university and the larger scholarly and teaching and learning world. We provide the buildings, we provide the technology, we provide the expertise that makes the system work. We are a repository responsible for centuries and centuries of the record, making sure that it will be available to future users. But we also are a gateway. We enable people to find information. Just like we select materials to bring into our library collections, we make similar selections in the online environment. Material and information of relevance and quality and authenticity to our user communities. We're also operating in the public interest. One of the things we often lose sight of is how this technology environment which we've created has thrown up a whole set of extraordinary national information policy issues. Issues of privacy, intellectual freedom, who has access to the internet, how much do they pay, and not to speak of the extraordinary copyright and intellectual property issues that we are struggling with. We're building digital libraries, but we know in doing so, it's increasingly known to us that quality in terms of libraries is far more than content. We know that quality increasingly means content plus functionality. It's what I can do with it that increasingly matters. We have created a poverty of abundance, a sense that there's far, far more information than we're enabling and providing that people can use very well. We're licensing huge amounts of published content from vendors all across the world. At Columbia, we provide access to 118,000 journals online. We're currently providing access through our library to over 3.5 million electronic books. We are digitizing huge quantities of material from our special collections. We've just done 15,000 letters of Herbert Lehman. We're doing 20,000 apartment brochures from throughout New York City from the 1920s and 1930s. Think of the extraordinary research that will take place in the use of those online databases. We also are reaching out to the web. We know that the web is an important authorship and publishing environment. We are selecting and downloading and archiving and cataloging content from the open web. We're gathering a lot of the literature produced within our university, the work of our faculty and students in all types of media. We know that we need to integrate services, we need to integrate the librarian into that online environment, and more people need the tools to enable them to use that information well. But as also Michael noted, we need to think much more aggressively and in a much more deeper way about the preservation and archiving of that content. We need to serve as a repository. We can't preserve what we don't hold. We have to buy, we have to acquire, we have to possess something before we can preserve it. We need to make sure it's persistent, that it's accessible and usable over time. We need to curate it to make sure that it's secure and will always be there. And we need to be a steward. We need to care for it and make sure that it has that long-term availability. The analog world, we never really took great care of our printed collections. They were used, they deteriorated, they disappeared. We're converting a lot of content from print to electronic. And we don't know how to take care of that electronic record yet. We're trying to build more capacity in our library programs in our collaborative efforts to preserve that record, but we are not doing a good job. And then we have all this born digital stuff, material that never had a life in print or in analog. And that clearly is information that requires our not only concerted effort within the library community, but it becomes a national, if not international, policy question in terms of the long-term preservation of that scholarly, educational, cultural record. Think about what's going on in the world of books, those who care about books and the importance of technology and the internet to their work. There are extraordinary expansion in the databases about books, the ability to learn about books, to buy books online. There are global communities of bibliophiles, individuals who are very specialized interest in different aspects of book production and authors and use of books. And now they can talk together in rich communities about the things that they care about. The whole writing and the creative process has been revolutionized by the use of technology. This is a great concern to libraries like Columbia that have great manuscript collections from authors. We have all of the extraordinary letters that they've written and the versions of the books that they've composed. Those who write online, it's not clear that they're capturing all of the versions of the work and all of the editing that they have done. What a loss to literary scholarship and to history. Technology is helping us preserve the book. In some cases, by making a digital copy, it enables us to move the use online and to preserve and reduce the use and abuse of the individual printed work. The promotion and sale of books. We can move way beyond Amazon in terms of the way books are being promoted and bought around the world. The whole book production and book publishing community is totally dependent on technology. The whole notion of print on demand and not having warehouses of books. And then we come to the issue of digital books and how we can look at them as an important way to enhance the readability and usability of information. When we think about electronic books in libraries, and I mentioned we had over 3.5 million electronic books in the collections at Columbia, do we buy them or do we rent them? Increasingly, we rent them. Are they going to be posted by authors for free on the web, or do people have sort of pretensions that they're going to make a lot of money by selling their works online? Is it going to be self-published? Are we dealing with an authorship revolution of the internet? Or is it going to be commercially published? Are publishers going to learn how to market their content through the web? Are we dealing largely with retrospective works, converting the historical books? Or are there going to be new books that are going to be written for the web? We had a Gutenberg E project funded by Mellon at Columbia, where we funded 36 new PhDs in history to write their first book as an online monograph, not thinking about it as a printed book first, but as an online book. And we have seen some extraordinary outcomes from that effort. Is it going to be just text, or are authors going to be able and willing to integrate all kinds of media and tools into that environment? Is there going to be a proprietary technology that I have to buy this machine in order to read books? Or are there going to be open source and open format readers? Do I really care about reading an individual book? Or do I really want a database of books? Do I want an individual book about economic history? Or do I want 10,000 books about economic history provided in a database of books that allow me to look at relationships over time and to look at the linkages and development of economic history thought? It's an extraordinary world of digital publishing that's beginning to take place. And the whole, and final point, is the whole impact on reading and the consumption of information. Reading online versus reading from a printed text opens up the whole question about the physicality of working with something that you hold in your hand. The pages, the geography of reading, knowing where you have been and where you're going. That's very hard to conceive of and visualize in the movement of pages across the screen of a computer. The psychology, if you will, of using a 15th century manuscript of a work versus a paperback edition published last year. There's a certain psychological difference in handling the original versus a paperback. And we lose that sense of excitement and possibility online. The sociology of reading. Working on a computer is clearly, in many ways, a sole individual event, whereas reading from a printed text very often is a community event, a social event, reading to children in a children's library. And the whole notion, we don't understand the cognition, how people learn, how people absorb information in working in that online environment. There's a lot of talk here tonight about Web 2.0 and the social networking nature of creating sort of a collective intelligence, a shared intelligence around the use of information. I think we need to begin to worry and think about Web 3.0, the whole notion that there is an extraordinary capacity in having a database of information and being able to apply artificial intelligence capacities to that printed electronic text, which is available online, to ask questions that we've never been able to ask before. The library role in this whole environment is diversifying rapidly. We know that there is a sense of a challenge to PTB, what I call the powers that be, sort of a questioning of authority. In the same way we question authority in the workplace or in society, I think we're beginning to question the authority of the author who writes a book. I think there's a low tolerance for what I call MBC, management by cliche. There's a sense that the whole sort of traditional hierarchical and bureaucratic ways in which we think about relationships and think about relationships among information, that is, information building on each other to create the ultimate expression of that in the printed book, I think there's a huge erosion of that. So I think the whole notion of massively distributed collaboration on the web, scholars and students working together on a global scale, and what we were talking about earlier, constant partial attention, perhaps more than multitasking. But my grandchildren do not work in the same way that I work. So we come down to the point where we're not talking about a digitization of work and the born digital environment as an exception. We're increasingly talking about it as a rule. The mass digitization of text through Google, through Microsoft, the presence of works on the Internet Archive, the extraordinary conversion of analog collections taking place in our nation's libraries, archives, and museums. The realities of it are, we know it's expensive. We think that it's a relatively easy and straightforward process to convert a printed text to make it an effective online work. It's an extraordinary and expensive and expertise-intensive process. We're living in a schizophrenic environment as well, where users, my faculty and students, are moving with some great difficulty between the traditional analog book environment and the electronic online multimedia environment. It's a sense of mutability, of constant change, of hybrid approaches, of concerns about authority and authenticity, not to speak of the unsupportive legal framework, the copyright environment which we do not enjoy in this country today, which really raises questions about our ability to use technology and online digital works when we are threatened with lawsuits and the erosion of fair use as we've come to know it. But mass digitization creates opportunities. The breaking down of digital divides, knowledge divides, providing access to information in places and for people who may not have the economic resources or the national capacity to provide that type of support. We're also beginning to redefine the economics of information online. The notion of buying and owning a work versus renting and leasing a work, I think is something we should be concerned about. But one is very much redefining all aspects of the knowledge and information environment. Librarian of Congress, Daniel Borstein once said that knowledge is never used up, for it increases by its diffusion and grows by its dispersion. And I think he would applaud, a traditional historian that he was, he would, however, applaud the extraordinary work going on at the Library of Congress today to make its extraordinary deep collections available on the web to a global readership. Albert Einstein, when he came to the United States, would not travel by plane, and he often went from city to city on a train. On one such trip, he was sitting there, and the young man came around to collect the tickets. And suddenly Einstein realized he couldn't find his ticket, and he started digging in his pockets, and the young man said, "Dr. Einstein, don't worry, you don't need to find your ticket." But Einstein persisted, and he crawled on the floor, and he lifted up his seat, and again the young man said, "Dr. Einstein, please, please, you don't need to find your ticket." Einstein stood up, whirled around, looked the young man in the eye, and says, "Young man, it is no longer a matter of whether I can find my ticket. It's a matter of where I am going. In some ways, digital and network technologies have forced us to spend too much time looking for our tickets and not enough time thinking about where we are going. And in conclusion, in libraries in particular, there is a sense of, I sense a real heightened level of anxiety, a real feeling of being anxious, a sense of apprehension and fear. And I'm reminded of what Marshall McLuhan said, our age of anxiety is in great part the result of trying to do today's jobs with yesterday's tools. Is the book one of yesterday's tools? I think we also feel a sense of disruption, sort of being thrown into disorder. And I recall what Clayton Christensen said in an interview. One of the litmus tests is that a disruptive technology enables a larger population of less skilled people to do things that historically only an expert could. The ATM environment, taking my money out of a machine at 12 midnight, getting my ticket at the airport out of a machine, scanning my own groceries in the supermarket. Where's the librarian in this future knowledge environment? And lastly, the sense of chaos, a sense of confusion, a sense of unpredictability. But I always remember what Henry Adams, it says in the Education of Henry Adams, chaos often breeds life, while order breeds habit. Libraries, publishing, the world of books is full of chaos, but it's also full of life. And that's why it's very important and very exciting for us to be talking about this topic tonight. Thank you.